Okay, so there's something pretty significant happening right now over in Europe. It's this powerful new law, the Digital Services Act, the DSA. And it's really starting to change things online. Now, it was brought in, they said, to fight genuinely illegal stuff.
Right, the really harmful content. That was the pitch.
Exactly. But we're seeing some, honestly, eye-opening reports now. Sources like Reason Magazine, the U.S. House Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, those reports are quite revealing.
They're showing something startling. Nearly 99%, think about that, 99% of the online speech being removed under this law. It's actually legal speech.
It's an incredible statistic.
It is. I mean, your everyday opinions, maybe a joke, political memes even, potentially just swept away.
And it's not just happening over there.
That's the kicker, isn't it? This isn't just some European issue, because these big tech companies, they operate everywhere, globally.
One global policy often.
So what happens in Europe is starting to directly affect the conversations you have online, right here.
Because the penalties are so high.
Huge penalties. We're talking fines up to 6% of a company's global revenue. That could be billions of dollars.
Which forces their hand, essentially.
It creates this intense pressure for platforms to censor content, not just in Europe, but worldwide, to avoid those fines.
A global standard by default.
So the big question is, what does this actually mean for your freedom to speak your mind online? That's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Yeah, how a European law might be, as these sources suggest, muzzling voices far beyond its borders.
Imagine a world where just a casual online comment you make gets flagged, deleted. Not because of broken any law, but just because someone in power, some regulator, decided they didn't like it, called it harmful or misleading.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're unpacking this really critical issue. It reaches across oceans, hits right at one of our most fundamental liberties, freedom of speech. We're talking about the European Union's Digital Services Act, the DSA. And you shared some really compelling sources, that Reason article, the House Judiciary Report.
Yes, and they strongly suggest this law might be doing a lot more than just regulating the obviously harmful stuff.
Right. So our mission today is to, cut through the noise, figure out what the DSA is, how it's actually being used on the ground, and crucially, why it matters to you wherever you're listening from.
Well, what's fascinating, or maybe concerning, is that the DSA was launched with this stated goal, right? To create a safe, predictable, and trusted online environment. And the idea was tackle genuinely illegal content, child abuse material, incitement to terrorism, things we all agree on.
Sure.
And also address these big systemic risks, like major disinformation campaigns that could impact, say, public health or elections.
Okay, sounds reasonable enough on paper.
But as you said, the documents we've looked at, they raise serious questions about how it's playing out in the real world. It seems to be stretching far beyond those initial sort of widely accepted boundaries.
Okay, let's unpack that stretch then. The DSA passed in 2022. It was meant to be Europe's big answer to regulating the internet.
It came after Germany's NetzDG law, which was controversial in its own right back in 2017.
Right, that one forced platforms to remove manifestly illegal content really fast, within 24 hours sometimes.
And the core idea for both DSA and NetzDG was, on the surface, combating harmful content, hate speech, disinformation.
Seems like a worthy goal. But, as you say, the reports are painting a very, very different picture of the reality.
Yeah, and this really brings up the crucial question, what actually happens when these laws hit the ground, when they're put into practice? There's a report by the Future of Free Speech. It's a nonprofit academic research center cited in Reason.
Okay.
And it found that a huge majority, just a vast majority of online comments removed in places like France, Germany, Sweden, they were actually legally permissible speech.
Legally permissible, so not illegal.
Not illegal. For instance, in Germany, the number was astonishing. 99.7% of deleted Facebook comments were found to be legal.
Wow.
And 98.9% of deleted YouTube comments, also legal.
Almost everything then.
Pretty much. This isn't like a small margin of error, It's a massive chunk of lawful speech just getting wiped out, far beyond just targeting illegal content.
Those figures are just, they're stark. It really points to this incentive structure you mentioned, doesn't it?
Exactly.
This overenthusiasm in taking stuff down. It's not just random error.
No, it's driven by fear of the consequences.
Right. You're facing these potentially ruinous fines, 6% of global annual revenue. An existential threat for some platforms.
Absolutely. So they default to removing anything borderline, anything that might fall into a gray area.
Better safe than sorry, from their perspective.
Exactly. They prioritize avoiding the regulator's hammer over protecting speech that might actually be perfectly legal, so they end up silencing way more than the law supposedly requires.
So connecting this to the bigger picture then,
Hmm.
the DSA's power, it seems, goes well beyond just the strictly illegal stuff.
That's right. It empowers regulators to go after content that they broadly define as misleading, deceptive, or hate speech, even if it doesn't actually break any laws.
And the sources suggest there's an underlying philosophy here.
Yeah, the premise seems to be, as the sources highlight, a kind of paternalism, a belief that governments can't really trust ordinary citizens to figure things out for themselves online.
Or to handle content that someone, somewhere, might find offensive.
Right. And this really broad interpretation gives regulators huge leeway to shape online conversations according to their preferences.
And this is where it gets really concrete. Based on that House Judiciary Committee report, they highlighted specific examples from this private EU workshop held in May 2025.
Yes, a closed-door workshop.
And in one scenario, they discussed a pretty common political phrase like, we need to take back our country. EU officials apparently categorized that as coded language.
And illegal hate speech.
Illegal hate speech.
Yeah.
For a phrase that, let's be honest, we've heard from politicians across the spectrum here in the U.S. Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Donald Trump. They've all used variations of it.
Right. It's generally seen as a broad statement about political direction or national focus, not necessarily inciting hatred, but under this interpretation.
It's flagged. It becomes a target for censorship in Europe.
And it makes you wonder about the scope, you know? What else falls under this umbrella?
Well, the workshop documents apparently shed some light on that, too.
They did. They revealed that things like humor and satire, even memes, AI-generated content, they're considered top censorship targets.
Top targets? Satire.
Yes. The EU specifically asked platforms how they plan to deal with memes that may be used to spread hate speech or discriminatory ideologies.
But political cartoons, satire,
Yeah.
they've always been vital forms of expression, haven't they? Often challenging power.
Historically, yes. Crucial. So classifying them as top censorship targets feels like a really significant shift away from traditional free expression principles.
And this isn't just talking secret workshops, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned real-world examples.
Absolutely. We see it happening. Poland's National Research Institute, for example, asked TikTok to remove a post.
Okay, what did it say?
It just stated that electric cars are neither ecological nor an economical solution.
That's a policy debate.
Exactly. It's a discussion about economics, environment, public policy, things that should be openly debated, surely. But it was targeted for removal.
Wow.
And there's more. French authorities went after an ex-post from a U.S.-based account, mind you.
Right.
It used satire to question mass migration policies following a terrorist attack. Targeted.
Satire again.
And German authorities classified a tweet calling for the deportation of criminal aliens as incitement to hatred.
Okay, that one's maybe closer to the line for some, but still, it's a political stance being labeled illegal hate speech.
Right. And these cases, taken together, they really showed the DSA being used, or potentially used, to shut down debate on major political, economic, social, cultural issues. Basically, silencing views that regulators in Europe find problematic or simply disagree with, even if those views are perfectly legal.
So let's pull these threads together then. What does this actually mean for someone listening, say, in America or anywhere outside the EU?
Well, this is the core concern highlighted in the sources. The DSA isn't staying neatly within Europe's borders.
It's having a global ripple effect.
Precisely. It's effectively forcing American social media companies, the big ones, to change their global content rules.
Because it's easier for them to have one policy worldwide.
It's often more practical, yes. Maintain one set of terms, one moderation system. And remember, those massive penalties, 6% of global revenue, potential shutdowns.
The incentive is overwhelming.
Completely. Comply or face potentially crippling fines. So you end up with a de facto global censorship standard.
Set by European regulators.
Exactly. Which impacts what Americans, Canadians, Australians, everyone can see and say online. If a platform takes content down globally to avoid an EU fine, it's gone for everyone.
And what about these voluntary codes of conduct? The sources mentioned those.
Ah, yes. The codes on things like hate speech and disinformation. The DSA encourages platforms to join.
Encourages. Sounds optional.
Well, the sources suggest effectively mandatory is more accurate.
How so?
Because refusing to join, or leaving, seems to trigger intense regulatory scrutiny. Look at X, formerly Twitter.
Right.
They left the Code of Conduct on Disinformation in May 2023. They apparently objected to mandatory use of third-party fact-checkers.
Okay.
Less than 2 months after the DSA became legally binding, boom, X is facing an investigation.
And potentially a massive fine.
Reports suggest a potential fine exceeding $1 billion.
$1 billion. Okay, that doesn't sound very voluntary.
Not really. It certainly acts as a powerful incentive, you could say a mandate, to fall in line. It makes these voluntary codes pretty much compulsory for any major player.
And then there are these trust and flaggers. What's their role?
That's another layer. These are third-party groups, often government-approved, sometimes government-funded.
Okay, and they report content.
Yes, but the sources indicate they're uniformly pro-censorship. Their mandate isn't just to find illegal content. They're encouraged to push platforms to go beyond illegality, to remove anything that could be seen as hateful and harmful, even if it's legal.
So another mechanism pushing for broader removal.
A powerful, sometimes unaccountable one.
And you mentioned the EU tried to keep some of this quiet. That May 2025 workshop.
Yeah, the one on systemic risks where they discussed censoring things like Take Back Our Country or memes.
It was held in secret.
Apparently so. Participants were explicitly told not to describe the scenarios publicly or name who was there.
Which is unusual for EU workshops.
Stands in stark contrast, yeah. Others are often open, recorded. This secrecy naturally raises questions about what they were discussing and why they didn't want it public.
Okay, so it's no surprise then that this has caught the attention of lawmakers here in the U.S., the House Judiciary Committee.
Yes, they're actively investigating how foreign laws like the DSA are compelling censorship within the United States.
And they have issued subpoenas.
They have, to all the big names. Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, TikTok, X, Reddit, even Rumble. They want communications between these companies and European regulators.
Yeah, so why is Congress getting involved so forcefully? What's their main concern?
Well, the committee report is pretty blunt. They argue the whole structure of the DSA, particularly how it defines very large online platforms, or VLOPs.
Those with over 45 million EU users.
Right. They argue that threshold seems almost tailor-made to hit major American tech companies while letting most European ones off the hook.
So a potential economic angle, too.
That's implied. But their main stated concern is free speech. The report explicitly says the DSA infringes on Americans' First Amendment right to engage in free and open debate.
Strong words.
Very. They see it as an external force dictating speech rules within the U.S., effectively bypassing the First Amendment.
And they cited that incident with former EU Commissioner Thierry Breton.
Yes, apparently threatening X with a regulatory retaliation over a live interview with President Trump, warning about spillovers into the EU.
And the State Department didn't push back publicly.
According to the report, no public condemnation of those threats. Which really highlights this fundamental difference in philosophy, doesn't it?
Between the U.S. and Europe on free speech.
Exactly. Here, the general principle, the ideal at least, is that the answer to bad speech is more speech. Open debate. Let ideas compete.
Not enforced silence from the top down.
Whereas the DSA model seems rooted in a different belief.
Which is?
The sources argue it's fundamentally premised on the idea that governments can't trust citizens to handle information freely, that people need protection from potentially offensive or wrong ideas.
And that the government is the best entity to decide what's true or false, harmful or safe.
Essentially, yes. But history is littered with examples of governments defining disinformation or harmful content in ways that conveniently silence opposition and benefit those already in power.
Dissent gets labeled as dangerous.
Precisely. And dissenting voices, even uncomfortable ones, are crucial. Expert consensus isn't always right. We've seen that recently.
Like with the COVID lockdowns mentioned in the sources.
Yeah, policies initially presented as necessary consensus later showed devastating economic impacts, significant learning loss for kids. Suppressing debate around those policies early on arguably made things worse.
So, allowing diverse viewpoints, even ones authorities dislike, is actually protective.
It leaves societies less vulnerable to widespread error and allows for course correction and innovation.
Okay, so we've taken a deep dive into the EU's Digital Services Act, presented as a safety measure.
But functioning, according to these sources, increasingly like a censorship tool.
Yeah, we've seen legally protected comments getting removed, everyday political talk, even satire being targeted.
And these huge fines pushing platforms to adopt these broad rules globally. The implications really are vast.
What seems clear from this is that a regulatory system designed in Brussels is now actively shaping what people see and say online worldwide.
It really forces platforms into a corner. Adopt the EU's quite broad, you could say paternalistic, view of speech regulation, or risk billions in fines.
And that directly challenges the core principles of free expression that underpin liberal democracies, especially the First Amendment here in the U.S.
It really does. It puts unelected officials, regulators, trusted flaggers in the powerful position of deciding what thoughts are acceptable for public discussion. It's a potential shift in the global baseline for free speech.
So what does all this mean for you, listening now as you're scrolling through your feed, engaging online?
Well, it means understanding who gets to draw the lines is more critical than ever. Not just what gets censored, but who is defining harmful or misinformation and why they're using those specific definitions.
Because the internet connects everyone, but if one region's rules, driven by a specific philosophy about speech, can effectively silence voices everywhere else.
Where does that leave your individual right to speak freely, to hear different perspectives, to engage in that open exchange of ideas?
Definitely something to think about as you navigate the digital world today. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder to actively look for those diverse viewpoints, the ones that might be getting pushed to the margins.